Dr. Jill Colmo. I am a coordinator in the Reading Language Arts Department, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. And I don't know about you, but I cannot believe that we are already planning and preparing for Q4. This year has gone by so quickly, and I don't know about you, but I'm excited for spring break next week. I know everyone's excited about that. All right, let's get started today. Once again, this is quarterly content training for grades K-2 ELAR. And we're going to start with the what and how of what we will be doing today. So we believe that we should be acutely focused on effective instruction, equitable access and outcomes, and continual improvement toward excellence. The 4 strategies that will guide us on our path towards student achievement are instructional delivery and design, strategic staffing, equitable distribution of resources, and creating a sense of belonging. The academic services team, which I'm a part of, is positioned to influence instructional delivery and design. Academic services influences curriculum and instruction via 3 main levers: student experience, content, and pedagogy. In Dallas ISD, all means all. Tier 1 instruction represents high-quality, district-approved teaching strategies that benefit all learners, whether they are emergent bilingual, comprehensive, gifted and talented, or special education. By scaffolding, we can address diverse needs within the regular classroom setting, promote academic success for students with varying abilities, and create a sense of belonging. We ensure inclusivity to Tier 1 instruction because in Dallas ISD, all means all. All right, so here is our agenda for today. We will start by doing
no problem all day.
Quarter 1. We will then move into scaffolding with Amplify, and then we will take some time to look at some RLA resources. If you'll notice on the top right-hand side of my screen, there is an icon that represents a notebook and a pencil, and that indicates that there is a connection, a link, or an activity related to what's on the slide in your participant guide, which can be accessed at the bit.ly that is shown there on the screen. I also have put that bit.ly into the chat box. You can also find the attendance link on the last page of the participant guide. All right, so let's look at our learning objective for today. Our learning objective states, I am learning about the Amplify units for Q4. Success criteria 1 states, I can explain what Amplify units and topics will be covered in Q4. Success criteria 2 states, I can intentionally scaffold so that all of my students are successful. And our final success criteria says, I can identify resources that will support me and my instruction. All right, so go ahead and take a moment to silently reread success criteria 1. Again, if you're just joining us, the link to the participant guide and the attendance is in the chat box. If you need to look at what other QCT sessions are available, there is a link to that flyer as well. All right, so let's dig into the Amplify curriculum for Q4. We're going to start by taking a look at kindergarten and their knowledge units. Do a quick preview of those. They will begin working in Knowledge Domain 10, which is titled Taking Care of the Earth. In this domain, students continue to grow their knowledge of the interdependence of all living things on Earth and become aware of the importance of environmental awareness and conservation of natural resources. Students will gain understanding of the 3 R's of conservation: reduce, reuse, and recycle, and will begin to be able to recognize how people's actions affect the environment in which we live. Students will learn specifically about land, water, and air pollution, as well as the water cycle, the journey of trash from its creation to its burial in a landfill, and the steps in the recycling and composting processes. Notice that there is an Amplify Alive connection with this unit. Kindergarten teachers, be sure to read the clarity document for this unit for more detailed information. So what you'll do is, if your unit has an Amplify Alive connection in your clarity document, you should see something like this under the Bridging the Knowledge Concrete to Abstract section. So on the day where this Amplify Alive manipulative is included, you can see we have a couple of hyperlinks here. You have a hyperlink to the Amplify Alive spreadsheet, which is linked in your participant guide, as well as a link to what the visual aid is. And it is this dump truck manipulative. And it states it will give you a very brief idea of how you can use this manipulative in your classroom. Now, these manipulatives were purchased so that there is one manipulative per grade level per school. So you'll have to kind of work out with your colleagues how you're going to share this manipulative on that particular day. So one suggestion for the use of this manipulative is to use it to show students recycling basics with this super cool recycling truck that has a movable recycling bed and open and shut rear door. And it's kind of hard to see because the image is so small, but there are some small icons that show different types of items that can be recycled, such as paper, plastic bottles, things like that are on the sides here of the truck. So I would like for you to take a moment and to think about how you could use this Amplify manipulative in your classroom. How could this truck help you teach your students more about recycling? And what you're going to do is put your idea in the chat box, but don't press enter. We're going to do a waterfall chat. So if you have an idea for how this manipulative can be used with your students to talk about recycling, if you'll type an idea in the chat now, but don't press enter. I'm going to give you about 1 minute, and then I'll say push enter, and everyone will push enter at the same time. Okay? So if you have an idea, go ahead and put that in the chat box now, but don't forget, don't press enter. How would you use this Amplify manipulative in your classroom? All right, let's press enter and look at all the great ideas come into our chat. Okay, I see some great ideas here. And one idea that I had was similar to what I saw here about maybe giving some pictures of different items and then asking them either which bin those items would go in to be recycled or if those items could be recycled at all. Maybe do a little bit of a sorting activity with that. So yes, I encourage you to read over the other ideas that are in the chat. We always get such great ideas from each other. So if you have an Amplify Alive visual or manipulative to be used during your particular unit, don't forget it will be in the Bridging the Knowledge section of your clarity documents. And you are not limited to how we suggest using it. You can come up with other ideas on how you would use it, of course. If you do use these or should I say, when you use these in your classroom, if you want to take pictures of your students using them and then share them with someone on the RLA team, we would love to highlight you either on Twitter or X, as it's now known, or even in our newsletter. So we really want to see how these are being used in the classroom. All right, so great ideas. Thank you. Now, if we move into kindergarten knowledge domain 11, it is on Presidents and American Symbols, Uniquely American, an exploration of the lives and legacies of 5 famous presidents. This domain builds on the background knowledge acquired in the kings and queens and colonial towns and townspeople once upon America domains. Students will gain an understanding of the branches of government as well as the role of a president and will be able to compare that role to that of a king. Students are also introduced to several national symbols, including the American flag, the Statue of Liberty, the White House, and Mount Rushmore. In writing, students will practice sequencing events in order to create timelines of events in American history, as well as events and lives of individual presidents. And then finally, kindergarten will end the unit on knowledge domain 12, art and the world around us. This domain introduces students to artists from different time periods, countries, and cultures. Throughout the unit, students will learn about different kinds of art and how artists use the world around them as they make art. Students will connect this to what they have already learned about the earth, plants, and animals in the domain, farms from the ground up. They will also connect this to what they have learned about sculptures in the Presidents and American Symbols, uniquely American domain. Students will work toward compiling a class book by identifying a question they have about art and following a research plan to create a page. I would like to point out to you that in each of the final knowledge domain units in kindergarten, first and second grade, you will be using something that is called an authentic text collection. Here we see a picture of the authentic text collection that's provided for kindergarten. So these trade books should have arrived with your Amplify materials at the beginning of the year. So these are something that the text from these books are not provided in Amplify. You do have to read them from the actual book. So that's different than any other unit that we've done so far. So again, these are the books for Domain 12 in kindergarten. You will have to use these books. These were bought for every teacher, and they should have arrived at the beginning of the year with the rest of your Amplify materials. So if you put these like in a center or in a classroom library, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you have those pulled out and ready to begin with Knowledge Unit 12 towards the end of the year. So again, that is the authentic text collection. So you'll want to make sure you you find them, number one, if you don't know where they are. And secondly, make sure that they stay in a safe place for next school year. If you're unsure about what authentic text was included for each grade level, you'll see that the icon for the participant guide is here on the screen. There is a link to a document that then links to other documents that list each of the books in each authentic text collection for each grade level. All right, so let's think about or look at some of the connections that we have across knowledge units in kindergarten in quarter 4, because we know that all of the knowledge building builds upon previous learning or prepares students for upcoming learning. So you can see that in all 3 of the units that we'll be looking at in kindergarten, they all are reading and working with informational text. In each unit, they're also working with different kinds of graphic organizers. They're learning how to also sequence events. In units 11 and 12, we're looking at actual lives of people who lived previously. And then finally, in knowledge 10 and 12, they're both creating class books in each of those units. So those are some connections across units. So now that we've talked about how kindergarten will be working through the knowledge units in quarter 4, let's take a moment to look at what they're going to be doing in the skills units. So they're going to be beginning the quarter with Unit 8, Skills, in which students are introduced to double letter spellings for consonant sounds, as well as 4 high-frequency tricky words. And you can see them there on your screen: funny, all, was, and from. Results from this unit's student performance task assessment informs teachers which students are ready for the next unit and those who need targeted support with previously taught skills. Moving on to Unit 9, in this unit, students will practice writing uppercase letters and learn 15 new tricky words. This unit also introduces activity pages with comprehension questions related to the student reader. Students will be assessed on uppercase letter identification and formation, punctuation, and sentence reading. And then in our final skills unit 10, kindergarten students will be introduced to 5 new vowel sounds and 11 additional tricky words. Students are administered a cumulative end-of-year assessment, which will be optional and can be shared with grade 1 teachers via an end-of-year summary sheet if you choose to do so. All right, so that wraps up our preview for our kindergarten preview of quarter 4. All right, let's move on to first grade. So the knowledge units that will be in first grade in quarter 4 are domains 9 through 11. So starting with Domain 9, A New Nation, American Independence, students will learn about the birth of the United States of America as they're introduced to important historical events and figures in the story of how the 13 colonies became an independent nation. From the establishment of the 13 colonies through the conflicts that ensued between the colonies and Great Britain, students will learn how the British imposing taxes upon the colonies without representation led to the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of a new nation. In addition to hearing about important historical figures, including Betsy Ross, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin, students will also focus on the roles of women, Native Americans, and African Americans during the colonial era. The colonial era. Then they'll move on to Knowledge Domain 10, Frontier Explorers. In this domain, students will learn about the American frontier explorers and events that played an important role in the westward expansion of the United States. Students are introduced to early exploration of the American West and key figures such as Daniel Boone, Lewis and Clark, and Sacagawea. Students will learn about the hardships colonists faced as they moved westward, including the challenge of crossing the Appalachian Mountains. In studying the explorations of Lewis and Clark, as well as the Louisiana Purchase, students will understand the importance of the westward movement in expanding the United States. Finally, first grade will end the year in Domain 11, Adventure Stories, in which students will learn about diverse explorers, including Dr. Ellen Ochoa, Dr. Mae Jemison, and Jacques Cousteau, all models of perseverance and examples of what can be accomplished despite barriers and discrimination. Through these adventure stories, students will broaden their perspective of the world while gathering facts to write an informational paragraph, which forms the basis for their culminating gallery walkthrough activity. And again, in this final domain, you will be using an authentic text collection of actual trade books. So again, first grade teachers, you should have gotten a box at the beginning of the year when you got all your Amplify materials with these books in there. And if you need more information on the specific titles that were included, there again is a link in your participant guide. Again, you will not be reading typical read alouds from your teacher guide, but you'll be reading from these books instead. All right, so let's look at the connections across the knowledge units in first grade for quarter 4. You can see that in each one of the units, students will be setting a purpose for listening. And then in the first 2 units, 9 and 10, they'll be looking at important times in history in the United States, both the beginning of the nation and then also during westward expansion. In both of those units, they'll also be learning about important historical figures in those times. And in Knowledge 9 and Knowledge 11, we're also looking at other important people during specific times who showed perseverance and broke barriers. In both Knowledge 9 and 10, they will be using the somebody wanted but so then strategy. We're going to look more at that in a little bit as how that can be used as a scaffold for summarizing information. In all units, students will be identifying important information and sequencing events. And then finally, in all units, they'll be writing informational paragraphs. All right, so that was knowledge for first grade. Let's look at, had a couple more. They're also looking at hardships and perseverance, both in Knowledge 10 and Knowledge 11. So that wraps up knowledge. So we're going to look at the 3 skills units during quarter 4, which starts with Unit 5, Skills 5, in which students will begin learning spelling alternatives that make up the advanced code. They practice making nouns plural and changing spelling when adding suffixes. In grammar, students identify sentence types, statements, questions, and exclamations, and practice creating longer sentences. They plan, draft, and edit a letter in which they express their opinions to the main character of the student reader. And so, yes, even in first grade, if you know anything about star writing beginning in third grade, they can be asked to write an argumentative essay. So even by writing an opinion letter in first grade, we're preparing them for that task later on. In Skill 6 in first grade, students continue to work with several spelling alternatives for consonant sounds. They review nouns and pronouns and then learn to match pronouns to the nouns to which they refer. They plan, draft, and edit a personal narrative. And then finally, in Skill 7, students will continue to learn more about the advanced code, focusing now on spelling alternatives for vowel sounds. In addition, students learn about the use of conjunctions and commas, as well as noun-verb agreement in sentences. Students practice the writing process by planning, drafting, and editing an informative or explanatory text. There is an optional end-of-unit assessment available, and if you choose to do that, that's some good data that can be shared with second grade teachers the next year. All right, so let's move on to second grade. In second grade, they will be doing domains 10, 11, and 12 for knowledge. Starting with knowledge domain 10, Journeys to America, Land of Opportunity. Students explore the idea of e pluribus unum and the importance of immigration in the history of the United States, with a focus on the great wave of immigrants from Europe between 1880 and 1920. By examining the reasons people immigrated and why they settled in particular cities or regions, students may make connections to their own family history and cultural background. In learning about citizenship, students are introduced to basic knowledge about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and how these documents helped make the United States a land of opportunity. Next, in Domain 11, Fighting for a Cause, students will be introduced to several ordinary people who stood up for what they believed in and who fought for a cause, even when faced with immeasurable odds. These key historical figures devoted their lives to various causes, such as the abolition of slavery, the right for women to vote, and the welfare of migrant workers. They provide students with great examples of the power and perseverance and choosing nonviolent pathways to create awareness and momentum for a cause. Students will understand the connection between ideas and actions and how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. I'm going to pause for a minute because we did have a question about if grade levels before second grade could go ahead and log off. I strongly encourage you to stay because after this second grade preview, we are going to move into our learning piece for the day that's all about scaffolding, which is appropriate for all grade levels. So I do encourage you to stay. There's much more content to come. In second grade, domain 12, Up, and Away, the Age of Aviation. In exploring the history of aviation, students will hear the stories of early aviators, such as the Wright brothers, Ada de Acosta, and Amelia Earhart. They will study the science of flight, including the physics concepts of lift, and will research the social impacts of flight on the world. Students will increase their understanding of the research process, including brainstorming, asking questions, gathering information from text, and writing about what they have learned in order to present informational text to be displayed in an aviator's Hall of Fame. And just like in kindergarten and first grade, there is an authentic text collection at the in the final domain, domain 12. So again, teachers in second grade, you'll need to locate these books in your classroom. You should have gotten these in their own box with all of your Amplify materials at the beginning of the year. And if you need to know what specific titles those are, because maybe you put these books in your classroom library, there is a list of all the books for each grade level linked in your participant guide on the last page. All right, so let's move into the connections that we can see across second grade knowledge units. They are all working to understand important key vocabulary that's tied to the content. It's also each of these units are all centered around people and how immigration causes or aviation impacted their lives. The first two units are talking about important times in the history of America. In each unit, they'll be working on citing text evidence, which is very important to set them up for success in third grade and beyond when they have to provide text evidence for short constructed response or extended constructed response. Next, we see that we'll be introduced to people who show how things can be accomplished if they just have the power of perseverance, both in fighting for causes they believe in and those early aviators. They'll be making connections with their own ideas and with the world in Knowledge 10 and 11. In both of those units, they'll also be working on sequencing information. All right, so let's move into the two skills units that second grade will be covering this quarter. All right, in skills unit 5, students will be introduced to spelling alternatives for vowel sounds and the schwa sound. Students practice chunking phonemes as a means of reading multisyllabic words. They review grammar skills, learn about adjectives, and practice identifying the subject and predicate in a complete sentence. Additionally, students continue to work on narrative writing by rewriting an ending to a story from their student reader. And then finally, in Unit 6, students are introduced to several new spelling alternatives for vowel and consonant sounds. Students review grammar skills and learn about adverbs. They also learn both how to distinguish complete from incomplete sentences and how to identify and correct run-on sentences. Students are introduced to expository or report writing. Again, like in our other units, there is an optional end-of-year assessment, and if you choose to give that, those results can be shared with their future third grade teachers. All right, so that was a lot of information for each of the units. And what I'd like for you to do right now is to think about which unit in your grade level in quarter 4 are you looking forward to teaching the most? And why is that? And if you'd like to go ahead and add your answer to the chat, we'd like to see what everyone is thinking. Which unit are you looking forward most to teaching and why? Go ahead and pop that into the chat for us. All right, I love seeing the variety of feelings about everyone, what they're looking forward to teaching. And let me tell you, when I was working on writing curriculum documents for this quarter, I learned some very interesting things. For example, in first grade on the immigration unit, I learned that before we had a huge wave of Irish immigrants coming to us before the potato famine, that the main source, and I knew this part, that the main diet source for Irish people was the potato. But I learned that they ate an average of 16 pounds of potatoes every day. I don't know how in the world you could eat that many potatoes in one day, but that is what they did. And that to me is fascinating and a little scary. So all of these units have such interesting information. Also, in second grade with aviation, I never considered who invented the hot air balloon. But if you teach second grade, you'll be learning all about that in the aviation unit. All right, so thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on what you're looking forward to. That wraps up success criteria 1, and we're now going to move into success criteria 2. So I'm going to give you a moment to silently read success criteria 2. And before we move on, I want to take a moment to answer a question that I saw in the chat. And it was about the Amplify Alive materials. Once those materials were delivered to your school, it's up to your school as to where they will be stored and kept up with. So that was not something that we provided any instructions on. It is just up to each school on how those would be stored and managed. All right, so let's dig into scaffolding. So as we're doing that, you have a section in your participant guide Under success criteria 2 for a quick write. I always have difficulty saying that, quick write. And I want you to think about and respond to this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer these 2 questions in your participant guide. What is scaffolding? And what are some ways you've been able to scaffold your students during Amplify this year? All right, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond to that in your participant guide. All right, to kind of wrap up your thoughts on your quick write. And some of the things that you might have written down were that scaffolds are some things that we put into place to help our students access content that they couldn't otherwise on their own. Or maybe, excuse me, you wrote that they were temporary, just used to get someone from place to place, and once they're no longer needed, they can be removed. All right, so we're going to be thinking about scaffolds, and some of you may have attended a session with the Professional and Digital Learning earlier, a couple of weeks ago on February 19th, where you learned more about scaffolding. So I've tried really hard to connect what we're talking about today with that presentation. So if you did attend that, maybe you'll notice some connections as well. If you didn't, I encourage you to take that course as well. So as we're thinking about scaffolding, in the Amplify units in K-2, students access the content through read-alouds conducted by the teacher, as you all well know. During and after these read-alouds, the teacher asks questions to check students' understanding and to push students' thinking. So I'm going to ask you just some reflection questions that you can just think about in regards to scaffolding. What challenges arise when you engage K-2 students in higher level conversations that require reasoning, describing problem solutions, or making generalizations about narrative or informational text that you read aloud? Consider what strategies you currently use to scaffold students' understanding of these texts read aloud. Do you feel like these strategies are helpful for all students, including those with limited English language skills? Also think about what happens if you call on a student to answer a question and they answer incorrectly. Do you feel that it's appropriate to ask other students to provide the answer instead? Think about how this might affect the initial student who could not successfully answer a question during a read aloud. So what we have learned from research is that abundant theory and research have demonstrated the importance of guiding students' learning with scaffolded supports. When adults scaffold students' language during back and forth conversations, they're able to expose students to advanced language models. These models matter for young students' language development and subsequent reading success. Because of this, Tricia A. Zucker and Sonia Q. Cabell have developed a model in which the teacher's goal is 5 turns in a conversation with one student. Even if the student initially struggles to answer the question, rather than moving on to a more competent peer, the teacher continues conversing with the student until they achieve a successful response. So in other words, they developed a model where the teacher asks a question, an open-ended question, like many of those in the comprehension section after the read alouds in Amplify Knowledge. Then they consider the student's response, and whether the student answers correctly or not, they're going to do some kind of follow-up, either supporting the student or challenging them, and then keeping the conversation going if time allows. If you'd like to learn more about this format, we're going to learn a little bit about it today, but it is, let me see if you can see it on my screen. It's a new book that came out not too long ago. Sorry, it's not letting me show it to you very well, called Strive for 5 Conversations, published by Scholastic. You will see the citation on the next few slides there. So what they introduced us to or reminded us of is something called a scaffolding ladder. So once the teacher asks a question and the student gives an answer, That response serves as a guide to help the teacher decide whether to scaffold upward or downward. So if the student needs challenge, we're going to scaffold them upward. But if they need some support because they couldn't answer or they answered incorrectly, we're going to give them some support with a downward scaffold. Regardless of the direction of the scaffold, the goal is to expand on what students say and keep the conversation going, because we cannot express highly enough the importance of that oral language, especially in our K-2 classrooms. When a student's answer indicates they need to be challenged, an upward scaffold could be given. Take a moment to read over the suggestions for how to upward scaffold. Whereas if a student shows that they need support, a teacher could provide a downward scaffold. Read over these bullets or take a picture if you want to hang on to it. Thank you for putting the book in the chat. I appreciate that. Read over these to show how teachers can downward scaffold. With continued practice, teachers refine their use of contingent scaffolds that minimize dependency on the teacher while ensuring that students have opportunities for success. All right, so let's dig into what this might look like in Amplify. So a key characteristic of scaffolding is the concept of minimizing dependency on teacher support. So we don't want to make our students so dependent on us that they can't do anything without us, particularly when guiding the student to revise an inaccurate understanding of a question. The goal of a downward scaffold is to reduce stress for the student while not creating too much dependency on the teacher. So let's take a look at an example from Kindergarten Knowledge 11, Lesson 3. So here's a question that was in that's in that unit as a comprehension question. What did George Washington do to reward Henry Knox after the colonists won back the city of Boston? Now, this is just a recall level question, not that difficult, but we know that those read alouds have a lot of information and they are long, and it's sometimes difficult for kids to remember these things. So if a student's unable to answer the question or answers it incorrectly, the teacher can use the downward scaffold to make the task easier. Here are 3 options that the teacher could choose from. So first of all, if the student is in need of minimal support, the teacher could reduce the choices by asking an either-or question, such as, did George Washington make Henry Knox a general, or did he give him a cannon? So you're still asking the same question, but you're giving them 2 choices. Another option for a student that needs a little bit more support is to give them a close or fill in the blank technique by stating something like, George Washington made Henry Knox a, and they just have to fill in the blank. And by the way, the answer to this is he made him a general. And then finally, for our students that need most support, the most intensive support, the teacher may just decide to give the student the answer and have him or her repeat it back. George Washington made Henry Knox a general, and then have the student repeat it back. Again, we see too often in classrooms that students answer questions incorrectly and teachers will just move on to another student. We want to make sure that, especially those kids who got it incorrectly, have a chance to get the correct knowledge. So here, those are just 3 different examples of some scaffolds that you could use in those situations. Okay, what about some upward scaffolds for students who got the right answer? We still want to engage them in more conversation. So here are some things that we might do with them. So when we give an upward scaffold, the goal is to push for higher level reasoning without stretching students too far beyond their capacity. These concepts of contingent scaffolds minimize dependencies are illustrated on the left. Effective teachers use scaffolding strategies that provide just the right level of support for a student's current level of understanding. So let's look at that same question. What did George Washington do to reward Henry Knox after the colonists won back the city of Boston? So if the student gives a correct answer, we still want to provide some type of follow-up to stretch their thinking. If we choose to give just a slight challenge, we may ask the student to make a connection Notice a pattern, to provide additional facts or give an opinion or judgment. For example, we might ask, what was the relationship like between Washington and Knox after this? To provide even more challenge, we may ask students to infer, such as by asking, how do you think this made Henry Knox feel? To take it to an even higher level, we might ask students to explain or infer a chain of events or what made things happen, such as with cause and effect. We might follow up by saying, why do you think Washington made this decision? So again, we're still trying to stretch our students and continue to engage them in those rich conversations. All right, so those are just some types of scaffoldings we could use with questions. Now let's look at another type of scaffolding that we could do with an exit ticket. This is an exit ticket or an exit pass, excuse me, from first grade Knowledge 9, A New Nation, American Independence. So just take a moment to look over what first graders have to do on this exit pass. When I shared this deck as part of the quality control that all of our decks have to go through with the PDL department, they were blown away that this was a question that's being asked of first graders that they have to respond to in writing. How and why did the Sons of Liberty respond to the taxes the British Parliament was making the colonists pay? So if we think about some ways we can scaffold students so that they're successful with this task, we might do something that is a protocol called Read, Think, Talk, Write. So the first step of that protocol is the reading of the text. And we know in Amplify, teachers are doing the read aloud because it is written at a higher reading level than what our students are. So students are just listening there. So we've taken, that is a scaffold of them accessing the content. So if we provide our students with more scaffolding on this type of task, they may be more successful. So by breaking this exit ticket task into different components, students will have done some mental rehearsal and oral rehearsal before having to write the answer, increasing the likelihood that they will write a strong response. So first, the teacher reads aloud the text, and then the teacher poses the question and has students think. How and why did the Sons of Liberty respond to the taxes the British Parliament was making the colonists pay? Time is then provided for students to think about the question and their answer. Next, the teacher provides a sentence stem for students to use during the next section, the talk portion. Students will take turns with a partner discussing their answer. Hearing from a peer allows each student to further refine their own answer. And then finally, we have students write on the exit ticket. They're provided with the same sentence stem, but now they're just writing. So they've had time to listen to a read aloud. They were able to think about their answer. They got to talk with a peer, and now they are writing. So all of those steps, by breaking it down into smaller pieces, those are all types of scaffolds. But there are also some other scaffolds provided on the slides that I'm showing you. Think about some of the other scaffolds that you see here. You might have noticed that I used some sentence stems for them to provide their answers. So if they're only thinking about the meat of the answer and not actually forming a complete coherent sentence, that takes a lot of the cognitive work away from them. You might have also noticed that there were some images that can help them think back to what they saw during the read aloud, both from the read aloud and then also that pencil at the top. If you notice that each of the steps had an icon with that told them what step they were on. And then also you probably noticed there was a word bank with important vocabulary that they learned in the lesson and previous lessons that could also be used to help them answer the question. So there were lots of scaffolds included here in this one activity, for this one exit ticket. So if you completed any of the training on scaffolding provided by Professional and Digital Learning, you may recognize that these are different types of distributed scaffolds because they are implemented during the learning process. And you do have information on these in your participant guide where you can also take notes on them. If you'd like to learn more about the Read, Think, Talk, Write protocol and how you can use it in Amplify, I'm going to share a link to a PLC package that I put out a few weeks ago that goes much more in depth into this process. So this is something that I would have to take what was in Amplify and just add a little bit to it to scaffold my students. But we know that there are scaffolds already provided in Amplify. So let's look at a couple of those. So we know that there are always some sidebar supports from lessons such as this one in first grade in Unit 10. And if we look close up, we can see that there are suggestions for support for students who are in challenges for students who are ready for more. Again, these are types of distributed scaffolds. Additionally, there are writing scaffolds for emergent bilinguals based upon their TEL-PASS levels. And then finally, we can see that there is a graphic organizer such as this Somebody Wanted But So Then used in this same first grade unit that's used to scaffold students in providing a summary of the content. If I had to choose my top 5 strategies that all students need to know, Somebody Wanted But So would be one of them because it is very, very helpful in teaching students how to write a summary, both of literary text and of informational text, which is what they are practicing here. So if we want to look at how this might be filled out with by students or with teacher support, you can see that it's Daniel Boone wanted to go west, but the Appalachian Mountains were a natural barrier. So he hired people to help him widen Native American trails. Then more people could cross the mountains on the Wilderness Road. Now, first graders are going to have a difficult time doing a summary on their own. Summary is hard even for adults. So this graphic organizer and the teacher's help can get them to become a more successful summarizer. All right, so as I said, there are lots of scaffolds already in Amplify. All right, so I want you just to think about, you just make a mental note of this because we're going to need to wrap up here. What is one scaffold we talked about today that you can commit to integrating into your upcoming instruction? Maybe you noticed something that is already in Amplify that you want to commit to use, or maybe you learned about something new here. And as you're thinking about that, we are going to move into our final success criteria, which has to do with identifying resources that will support you in your instruction. So we know that it's the time of year when many of you have analyzed your map growth data from MOY. And you might be thinking, well, what am I going to do with my students who show that they're struggling on that data? So one thing you can use is the Amplify Intervention Toolkit. So this is a comprehensive resource site designed to help teachers provide tiered support using materials that directly align to Texas ELAR core instruction. These materials can be used flexibly in each tier with students who need more time in instruction mastering specific skills. The site has 2 sections, a home page and the actual intervention toolkit. The intervention toolkit page includes resources in specific skill areas for planning, instruction, teaching, and monitoring student progress. All materials are downloadable and printable for ease of use. Teachers can select from skill areas including phonological and phonemic awareness, letter sound knowledge, simple patterns, complex patterns, multisyllabic words, fluency, comprehension, and handwriting. There is a direct link to the intervention toolkit in your digital workbook, or I can also show you how to access it via Clever, which I will do now. So when you go into Clever and you choose Amplify like you would do any other time, instead of clicking K-5 Elementary Literacy Program, you can see where my arrow is. It's pointing to that box where it mentions the intervention toolkit. You can also access it there. Some of you might have also noticed that it is linked on some of your instructional planning calendars as well. All right, so the Amplify Intervention Toolkit is something great that can be used outside of your regular Amplify instruction to support students. All right, so some of the Q4 upgrades that we have for you in the curriculum include even more mention and addition of engagement strategies designed to involve students more actively in the lessons. And you can see some of the ones we tried to include here on your slide. And hopefully many of you have also noticed that something frequently requested has been available for several weeks, the Amplify visual aids. And those are provided as a supplemental resource to help with visual representations during lessons. These decks are visual aids and will not replace the actual Amplify lessons. And just know that as we receive those, we add them every day to the instructional planning calendar. So if you don't see it when you're planning, keep checking back. It should be there soon. Something else that has been requested is that we provide more opportunities for formative assessment. So in every week in the knowledge units, you should see 2 opportunities for weekly formative assessment. These are optional assessments available in All in Learning. Many of these weekly formative assessments are targeted to support the lower scoring math areas that many of you learned about with us in our February 19th training. Again, these weekly formative assessments are optional and can be accessed in the All in Learning platform or via a direct embedded link on each week's IPC. Don't forget that we have a Padlet that has Amplify internalization videos included. Again, this is linked in your participant guide. This will help you through unpacking each unit. And additionally, we also have multiple PLC packages available. These are self-paced asynchronous courses in Cornerstone that dive into RLA content. I know that many of you might have already done the best practices with evidence-based responses for K-2, but if you have not, I highly encourage you to do so because that session teaches you about many skills that we need to embed into our instruction to ensure that our students are ready to begin writing short constructed and extended constructed responses once they get to 3rd grade and beyond. All right, so if you need help accessing that, those links again are in your participant guide. Tomorrow afternoon, if you don't have anything going on and you would like to learn more about how Amplify embeds STAR practice into their instruction, you can learn more about that from 4 to 5 p.m. on a webinar hosted by Amplify. And all attendees will be entered into a drawing for a signature Texas t-shirt. So if you're interested in that, again, it is linked in your participant guide. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm trying to go really fast here. 2nd grade teachers, if you feel like you need more PLC support, starting tomorrow, we have opportunities for you to come throughout the day to learn more about the upcoming units. Again, this is for 2nd grade because that is one of our focus grade levels for this year. So if you'd like a little bit more support, this PLC will happen tomorrow afternoon, all throughout the day. More information is linked in your participant guide. We will have curriculum camps this summer. So I don't have any more information other than that for you, but just know that information will be coming out soon. So if you learned from and enjoyed curriculum camps last summer, be sure to join us this summer. Finally, we do have office hours for RLA every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Links for signing up for that are in your participant guide. It's come and go to ask questions. And when you've asked your question and gotten your answers, you're free to go. Also, be on the lookout for our upcoming Reading Language Arts newsletter that should be sent to you on March the 8th. This is the Reading Language Arts team. If you need any help or assistance, you are welcome to reach out to any of us on the team.